The lightning split the Montana sky like a jagged scar, illuminating the woman clinging to her horse's neck as the animal stumbled through mud that sucked at its hooves with every desperate step. Nora Daniels had left Fort Benton 3 days ago with a wagon train heading south to Helena, but when her father took ill with fever, the group had pushed on without them, promising to send help back. That help never came. Her father died 2 nights ago, and she buried him alone beneath a cottonwood tree, marking the grave with rocks because the ground was too hard for proper digging. Now the storm that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke with a fury that turned the prairie into a churning sea of grass and water. Her mare screamed as another bolt of lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder following so quickly that Nora knew they were in immediate danger. She could barely see through the sheets of rain, her dress plastered to her body, her fingers numb from gripping the reins. The horse reared suddenly, and Nora felt herself sliding, her wet hands losing purchase. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. The mare bolted, disappearing into the gray curtain of rain before Nora could even cry out. She lay there for a moment, gasping, feeling the rain hammer against her back. Every breath hurt. She forced herself to her hands and knees, then to her feet, swaying as the wind tried to knock her down again. She had nothing now. No horse, no supplies, no shelter. The storm roared around her like a living thing, and she stumbled forward simply because stopping meant dying. Through the rain, she thought she saw a light. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, but it persisted, a warm glow that seemed impossible in this deluge. She walked toward it, then ran, her boots sinking into the mud with every step. The light grew brighter, and she could make out the shape of a building, low and solid against the storm. She reached what appeared to be a barn and pounded on the door with both fists, screaming for help though the wind tore the words from her mouth. The door swung open so suddenly she nearly fell inside, and strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Jesus Christ, woman, get in here before you drown." The voice was deep and rough, and Nora found herself pulled into warmth and relative quiet. The roar of the storm became muffled as the man pushed the door closed behind her, securing it with a heavy bar. She stood dripping on the packed earth floor, shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and looked up at her rescuer. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes that looked almost black in the lamplight. His face was weathered and rough, with several days of beard growth shadowing his jaw. He wore a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and his boots were caked with mud and straw. "Can you talk?" he asked, studying her with concern. "Are you hurt?" I am not hurt," Nora managed, though her voice shook as badly as her body. "My horse threw me. She ran off. I have been traveling for days in the storm." "You are half frozen," the man said, cutting off her stammering explanation. He grabbed a blanket from a nearby hook and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come on. The house is just across the yard, but we will have to run for it." "I cannot impose," Nora started to say, but he was already moving, taking her arm and guiding her back to the door. "The only imposition will be if I have to explain to the sheriff how I let a woman freeze to death in my barn," he said, and there was something almost like humor in his voice despite the situation. "On 3. 1, 2, 3, he threw open the door and they ran together through the storm. The distance could not have been more than 30 feet, but the wind fought them for every inch, and by the time they reached the porch of the small house, Nora was gasping again. The man shoved open the front door and pulled her inside, then slammed it shut behind them. The interior of the house was simple but clean. A single large room with a pot-bellied stove radiating heat, a table and chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves holding supplies and a few books. Nora stood dripping on the floor, acutely aware that she was making puddles on the swept boards. "Stand by the stove," the man ordered, already moving to rummage through a trunk at the foot of his bed. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Nora felt her face flush despite the cold. "Sir, I cannot." "I am not suggesting anything improper," he said, turning to face her with what looked like a long shirt in his hands. "I am going to step outside onto the porch. You are going to strip out of everything wet, dry yourself with this towel and put on this shirt. It will come down past your knees. Then you are going to wrap yourself in that blanket and sit by the stove until you stop shaking. Understood?" His tone left no room for argument. Nora nodded mutely. "Good," he said and headed for the door. "I will give you 5 minutes." True to his word, he stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. Nora could see his silhouette through the window, standing with his back turned, rain pouring off the roof around him. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, clumsy from cold and shock. She peeled away the layers of soaked fabric, her undergarments, everything, until she stood naked and shivering in the middle of a stranger's house. She dried herself as quickly as she could with the rough towel he had provided, then pulled the shirt over her head. It smelled of soap and wood smoke and something else, something masculine that was not unpleasant. The fabric hung on her, falling well past her knees as he had promised. She wrapped the blanket around herself and sat in the chair closest to the stove, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Are you decent?" the man called from outside. "Yes," Nora answered, and he came back in, water streaming from his hair and shoulders. He hung his own wet coat on a peg by the door and ran a hand through his hair, scattering droplets. Then he moved to the stove and added more wood from a box nearby, stirring the coals until the fire blazed higher. "There is coffee," he said, gesturing to a pot sitting on the stove top. "It has been there since morning, so it will be strong enough to strip paint, but it is hot." "Thank you," Nora said. She watched as he poured 2 tin cups full of thick black coffee and brought one to her. She wrapped her hands around it, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. The man pulled the other chair closer to the stove and sat down, stretching his long legs out in front of him. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside and the crackle of the fire. "I am Nathan Wright," he said finally. "I run cattle on this land, about 500 acres stretching east toward Helena." "Nora Daniels," she replied. "I was traveling with a wagon train from Fort Benton to Helena. My father took sick and died. They left us behind." Nathan's expression darkened. "They left you." "They said they would send help back, but no one came." Nora stared into her coffee, seeing her father's face in the dark liquid. "I buried him 3 days ago and tried to follow their trail, but the storm hit and my horse panicked." "That is a hell of a thing," Nathan said quietly. "I am sorry about your father." "Thank you." Nora took a sip of the coffee and nearly choked. He had not been exaggerating about its strength, but it was hot and bitter and real, and it helped anchor her to the present moment. "I do not know what I would have done if I had not seen your light." "Providence, maybe," Nathan said. "I do not usually work in the barn this late, but one of my horses was favoring her front leg. I was checking on her when I heard you pounding on the door." "Is she all right?" "The horse. She will be, just a stone bruise." Nathan studied her over the rim of his cup. "What were you planning to do in Helena?" "My father had a sister there," Nora said. "I have never met her, but he said she married a shopkeeper. I hoped she might take me in, help me find work." "Do you know her married name?" Nora shook her head. Father and she had not spoken in years. There was some disagreement when she married. He only told me about her before he died, said I should try to find her. Nathan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Helena is not a small town anymore, he said carefully. Finding one woman married to a shopkeeper could take some time, especially if you do not have a name. I will find a way, Nora said, though she heard the uncertainty in her own voice. I have to. The storm continued to batter the house, and Nathan rose to check the windows, making sure they were secure. You will stay here tonight, he said. It is not proper, I know, but the storm is not letting up and you have nowhere else to go. Tomorrow, when the weather clears, we will figure out what to do next. I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. Nathan turned to look at her, and his expression was serious. I am not the kind of man who turns someone away in a storm, Miss Daniels. You will sleep in the bed, and I will make myself comfortable by the fire. In the morning, we will talk more. Nora wanted to argue, to protest that she could not possibly take his bed, but exhaustion was catching up with her. The warmth of the fire and the coffee were making her drowsy, and every muscle in her body ached. You are very kind, she said softly. I am practical, Nathan corrected, but there was something gentle in his voice. You have had a rough few days. Get some rest. He busied himself pulling blankets from the trunk and making a pallet on the floor near the stove while Nora finished her coffee. When he gestured toward the bed, she rose on unsteady legs and made her way to it, sliding beneath the quilts. The bed smelled like Nathan, that same combination of soap and wood smoke, and she found it oddly comforting. Good night, Mr. Wright, she said. Nathan is fine, he replied, settling himself on his makeshift bed. Good night, Miss Daniels. Nora, she whispered, but she was not sure if he heard her. Sleep pulled her down almost immediately, deep and dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of frying bacon. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she sat up to find Nathan standing at the stove, tending a skillet. Morning, he said without turning around. There is water in the basin if you want to wash up. Your clothes are dry. I hung them by the fire last night. Nora looked and saw her dress and undergarments draped over the back of one of the chairs, indeed dry, if somewhat wrinkled. She felt her face heat at the thought of Nathan handling her intimate things, but he had done it out of necessity and kindness. Thank you, she said, sliding out of bed. The morning light revealed more details of the house she had missed the night before. The books on the shelf were worn but well cared for, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but she spotted a few novels as well. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything had a place. It was the home of a man who lived alone but who had not given up on civilization entirely. She washed quickly, acutely aware of Nathan's presence even though he kept his back turned, and dressed in her now dry clothes. The fabric felt stiff and strange after the softness of his shirt. Sit down and eat, Nathan said, dishing bacon and eggs onto 2 plates. He set them on the table along with a loaf of bread that looked somewhat stale but edible. We need to talk about what happens next. Nora sat and, despite everything, found herself hungry. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Nathan spoke again. The way I see it, you have a few choices, he said. I can take you into Helena today. It is about a 3-hour ride from here. You can try to find your aunt, though like I said, that might be difficult without more information. You might be able to find work, but it is tough for a woman alone in a rough town. What are my other choices? Nora asked, though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer. Nathan looked uncomfortable. You could stay here for a while, just until you figure things out. I could use help around the place. I've been trying to manage everything myself since my hired hand left last month to try his luck in the gold fields. You could cook, help with the chickens and the garden, that sort of thing. I would pay you wages, and you would have a safe place to stay." "That would not be proper," Nora said automatically. "A single woman living with a single man." "I know how it looks," Nathan said. "But this is Montana territory in 1878, not Boston. People out here are more practical about these things, and I am not suggesting anything improper. You would have your own space. I could rig up a curtain to separate off the sleeping area, give you some privacy." Nora studied him across the table. He had a good face, she decided, even if it was rough around the edges. There was honesty in his dark eyes, and his offer seemed genuine. But could she trust him? She had no reason to, really, except that he had already helped her when he could have easily turned her away. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me." "No, but I know what it is like to be alone and desperate," Nathan said. "When I first came out here 5 years ago, I was running from some bad decisions back in Kansas. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a horse I had won in a card game. A rancher named Tom Sullivan gave me a job when no one else would. He taught me everything I know about cattle and working this land. He died 2 years ago and left me this place in his will, said I had earned it." Nathan paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I figure if Tom could give me a chance, I can do the same for someone else." It was a long speech for a man who seemed to prefer silence, and Nora felt something shift in her chest. "I would work hard," she said. "I am not afraid of labor. My mother died when I was young, and I kept house for my father for years. I can cook and clean and tend a garden. I know a little about chickens and livestock." "Then we have a deal?" Nathan asked. Nora took a deep breath. Going to Helena alone was terrifying, but staying here with a strange man was not much less frightening. Still, there was something about Nathan Wright that made her want to trust him. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was something else, something she could not quite name yet. "We have a deal," she said, "but I want to be clear. This is employment, nothing more." "Understood," Nathan said, and he held out his hand across the table. Nora shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. That morning, Nathan showed her around the property. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and bright. His land stretched out in rolling hills covered with prairie grass, with a creek running through the eastern section. He had about 50 head of cattle, he told her, a mix of longhorns and a few shorthorns he was trying to breed for better beef. There was a chicken coop behind the house with a dozen hens and a rooster who eyed Nora with deep suspicion. The garden plot was overgrown with weeds, clearly neglected. "I have not had time to keep up with it," Nathan admitted. "Between the cattle and trying to repair the barn roof and everything else, the garden fell to the bottom of the list." "I can fix that," Nora said, already planning how she would organize the space, what she might plant even this late in the season. They spent the rest of the morning in a flurry of activity. Nathan rode out to check on his cattle, and while he was gone, Nora scrubbed the house from top to bottom, attacking the layers of bachelor dust with something close to vengeance. It felt good to work, to have a purpose. She had been adrift since her father died, carried along by events beyond her control. Now, finally, she had something to do with her hands and her mind. Nathan returned at midday and stopped dead in the doorway, staring at the transformed interior. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. "I am not tired," Nora said, though that was not entirely true. "I found potatoes and onions in your stores. I can make a stew for dinner if you have any meat." "There is salt pork in the cellar," Nathan said, still looking around in amazement. "And I shot a turkey 2 days ago." "Most of it is still good." "Perfect." That afternoon, Nathan took a length of canvas and some rope and rigged up a curtain that divided the sleeping area from the rest of the room, giving Nora a small private space. It was not much, but it was something. They worked together with an ease that surprised them both, falling into a rhythm as if they had been doing this for years instead of just a day. That evening, they ate the stew Nora had made, thick with vegetables and chunks of turkey, and Nathan proclaimed it the best meal he had eaten in months. "You were not lying about being able to cook," he said, soaking up the last of the gravy with a piece of bread. "My mother was an excellent cook," Nora said. "She taught me before she died. She always said a woman should be able to feed her family properly." "Your family is lucky then." "I have no family now," Nora said quietly. "My father was all I had left." Nathan was silent for a moment. "I am sorry," he said. "I know that does not help, but I am sorry." "Thank you." They fell into a routine over the following days. Nathan would rise before dawn and tend to the horses and cattle, and Nora would start breakfast. They would eat together, and then Nathan would ride out to check fences or move the herd or handle any one of the 1,000 tasks that running a ranch required. Nora would tend the chickens, work in the garden, cook and clean and mend. In the evenings, they would eat dinner and sometimes talk, sometimes simply sit in comfortable silence. Nora learned that Nathan was 26 years old, 3 years older than she was. He had grown up in Kansas, the youngest son of a farmer who had more children than land to leave them. He had made some mistakes in his youth, fallen in with a bad crowd, and nearly ended up on the wrong side of the law. Coming to Montana had saved him, he said. The wide open spaces and the hard work had given him a purpose. Nathan learned that Nora's mother had died of consumption when Nora was 12, and that her father had been a wanderer, always chasing the next opportunity, the next promise of fortune. They had moved from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Nora had always dreamed of having a real home, a place that was hers. "This could be that place," Nathan said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "If you want it to be." Nora looked at him, surprised. They had been living together for almost 2 weeks now, and she had grown comfortable in his presence. He was a good man, she had come to realize, steady and honest and kind. But she had not let herself think beyond the immediate future, beyond the next day and the next task. "I am just hired help," she said carefully. "You are more than that," Nathan said, and there was something in his voice that made her heart beat faster. "You have made this place feel like a home instead of just a house. I have not felt that in a long time, Nathan." "I am not saying anything has to change," he said quickly. "I am just saying that if you wanted to stay, beyond just working for wages, I would like that. I would like that a lot." Nora did not know what to say. She looked out at the land spread before them, golden in the dying light, and she felt something unfold in her chest, something warm and terrifying and wonderful. "I will think about it," she said. "That is all I ask." Summer deepened into its full heat, and the work on the ranch continued. Nathan hired a few men to help with the roundup, temporary hands who worked for a week and then moved on. Nora cooked for all of them, huge meals that disappeared almost as fast as she could serve them. The men were respectful, clearly warned by Nathan to watch their manners, and Nora found she enjoyed the bustle and activity. One of the hands, a grizzled old cowboy named Pete, pulled Nathan aside one evening. Nora could not hear what they said, but she saw Pete gesture toward her and then clap Nathan on the shoulder. Nathan's face had gone red, and he had pushed Pete away with something between annoyance and embarrassment. What was that about? Nora asked later, after the hands had bedded down in the barn. "Nothing," Nathan said, but he would not meet her eyes. "It did not look like nothing." Nathan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Pete was just giving me grief, saying that if I did not make an honest woman of you soon, someone else would come along and snatch you up." Nora felt her face flush. "That is hardly his business." No, it is not, Nathan agreed, but he is not entirely wrong either. What do you mean? Nathan turned to face her, and in the lamplight, his eyes were very dark. Nora, you have been here for almost 2 months now. In all that time, I have tried to be respectful, to give you space and not push. But I need you to know that what I said before, about wanting you to stay, that was not just about having help around the ranch. Nora's heart was hammering now. What are you saying? I am saying that I have feelings for you, Nathan said bluntly. I am saying that somewhere between you showing up half-drowned on my doorstep and now, I fell in love with you. And I know that is probably too fast and too much, and if you want to leave, I will take you to Helena tomorrow and help you find your aunt. But I had to tell you. I could not keep it in anymore. The room seemed to tilt around Nora. Nathan Wright loved her. This rough, kind, honest man loved her. And the terrifying thing, the wonderful thing, was that she loved him too. She had fallen in love with him over shared meals and quiet evenings, over watching him work with his horses and listening to him talk about his dreams for the ranch. She loved the way he always made sure she had enough to eat before he took his own portion. She loved the way he read in the evenings, his brow furrowed in concentration. She loved the gentle way he handled injured animals and the fierce way he protected what was his. You do not have to say anything, Nathan said when she remained silent. I just needed you to know. I love you too, Nora said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating. I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say anything. I thought maybe I was just grateful or confused or... She did not get to finish because Nathan crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. His lips found hers, and Nora melted into the kiss, into the solid warmth of him, into the feeling of being completely safe and completely alive all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I do not have much to offer you except this ranch and everything I am, but I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Yes, Nora said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course yes. They were married 3 weeks later in Helena by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Nora wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Nathan bought in town, pale blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Nathan wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. Pete and 2 of the other hands served as witnesses, all of them grinning like fools. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Nathan kissed his bride in front of God and everyone, not caring who saw. They had a small celebration back at the ranch, with food and drink and Pete playing a fiddle he produced from somewhere. Nora danced with her husband under the stars, and she thought she had never been happier in her entire life. That night, Nathan carried her over the threshold of their home, and they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Nora had been nervous, not knowing quite what to expect, but Nathan was patient and gentle, and by the end, she understood why people wrote poems about this kind of love. Autumn arrived, painting the grasslands gold and red. Nora had worked hard on the garden all summer, and now they reaped the rewards, storing away vegetables for the winter. She canned and preserved, filling the shelves in the small cellar Nathan had dug. The chickens were laying well, and they had eggs to spare, which Nora sometimes traded in town for other supplies. One afternoon in late October, Nathan came in from working with the cattle to find Nora sitting at the table, staring at nothing. Her face was pale and there was a strange expression in her eyes. "What is wrong?" Nathan asked immediately, his mind racing through possibilities. Was she sick? Had something happened while he was out? "I am with child," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan stood frozen for a moment, the words not quite computing. Then a grin split his face, huge and uncontrollable. "Are you certain? As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor," Nora said. "I have missed my courses twice now, and this morning I was sick." "My mother always said that was how it started for her." Nathan crossed to her and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. You are happy?" Nora asked, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that made Nathan hold her tighter. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said. "You have given me everything, Nora. A home, a family. I never thought I would have this." "Neither did I," Nora admitted, resting her head against his chest. "I was so lost when you found me. I did not think I would survive that storm." "Good thing I am stubborn about checking on horses with sore feet," Nathan said, and Nora laughed, the sound muffled against his shirt. Winter came early and hard that year, with snow falling in thick blankets and temperatures that dropped well below zero. Nathan made sure they were well stocked with firewood and supplies, not wanting to take any chances with Nora pregnant. She continued to work around the house, though Nathan fussed over her constantly, trying to get her to rest more. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she would tell him, exasperated but secretly pleased by his concern. "I know, but still. Let me do the heavy lifting." "Nathan, I am carrying a bucket of chicken feed, not a boulder." But she let him dote on her because she knew it made him happy, and because sometimes it was nice to be taken care of after spending so much of her life taking care of others. They spent the long winter evenings reading together by the fire, Nathan's hand resting on Nora's growing belly, feeling the baby move and kick. They talked about names and what color eyes the child might have, and what kind of person they hoped he or she would become. "I want our children to have what I did not," Nathan said one night. "A stable home, parents who love each other, a place they can always come back to." "They will have that," Nora promised. "We will make sure of it." Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and new growth, and Nora's belly had swelled to the point where she could no longer see her own feet. Nathan had sent for a midwife from Helena, a capable woman named Mrs. Anders who agreed to stay at the ranch for the last few weeks of Nora's pregnancy. The baby came on a warm May evening, the sun just setting behind the mountains. Nora's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Nathan, pacing outside on the porch because Mrs. Anders had banished him from the house, thought he might go mad from helplessness. He could hear Nora's cries through the walls, and every sound was like a knife to his heart. Finally, just as full dark fell, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, thin and outraged. Nathan stood frozen, not daring to breathe until Mrs. Anders opened the door and smiled at him. "You have a son, Mr. Wright," she said, "and your wife is asking for you." Nathan rushed inside to find Nora propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached slowly, almost afraid, and Nora pulled back the blanket to reveal a red, wrinkled little face with eyes squeezed shut and a shock of dark hair. "He is perfect," Nathan breathed, reaching out a finger to stroke the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "He looks like you," Nora said, smiling. "Same dark hair." "He has your nose, though," Nathan said. "Thank God for that. Mine is too big." Nora laughed weakly. "What should we name him?" They had discussed this at length over the winter, cycling through dozens of possibilities. But now, looking at his son, Nathan knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," he said. "After Tom Sullivan, the man who gave me my start. Thomas Daniel Wright, if you like the sound of that. Daniel for your father." Tears filled Nora's eyes. "I love it," she said. "Thomas Daniel Wright." "Welcome to the world, little one." Nathan sat on the edge of the bed, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders, and together they looked down at their son. This tiny person they had created together, out of love and hope and the chance meeting of a stranded woman and a cowboy in a storm. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Nathan said quietly. "Neither did I," Nora replied. "But here we are." "Here we are," Nathan echoed, and he pressed a kiss to her temple. The first year of Thomas's life was a blur of sleepless nights and constant wonder. Nora had never been so tired in her life, but she had also never felt more fulfilled. She watched Nathan with their son and saw a tenderness in him that made her fall in love with him all over again. He would walk Thomas around the house at night when the baby would not sleep, singing off-key cowboy songs in a low rumble that somehow always did the trick. As Thomas grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, active baby, the ranch prospered as well. Nathan had expanded his herd, and the cattle were bringing good prices in Helena. He hired on 2 permanent hands, young men named Jimmy and Carlos, who bunked in the barn and helped with the daily work. This freed Nathan to spend more time with his family, which he treasured above everything else. One summer evening when Thomas was just over a year old, Nora and Nathan sat on the porch watching their son toddle around the yard, chasing chickens and falling down in the grass, only to get up and try again. "He is going to be stubborn," Nora observed. "Like his father." "Stubborn is what you need out here," Nathan said. "This land does not forgive weakness." "No," Nora agreed, "but it rewards strength and love and perseverance." Nathan looked at her, this woman who had come into his life like a miracle, and he felt his heart swell with gratitude. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here with me instead of going to Helena to find your aunt?" "Never," Nora said firmly. "This is where I was meant to be, I know that now. That storm did not bring me to you by accident, Nathan, it brought me home." Thomas squealed with delight as he successfully caught one of the chickens, though he immediately let it go when it squawked in protest. Nathan and Nora laughed together, and in that moment, everything was perfect. The years passed with a rhythm dictated by seasons and the work of the ranch. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic little boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's quick smile. When he was 3, Nora became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. She gave birth to a daughter in the dead of winter, a tiny thing with wisps of blonde hair and blue eyes that would eventually turn green. They named her Margaret, after Nora's mother, and called her Maggie from the start. She was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his little sister and appointed himself her protector, bringing her toys and patting her head with clumsy gentleness. By the time Thomas was 5 and Maggie was 2, the ranch had grown significantly. Nathan now ran nearly 200 head of cattle, and he had built a larger barn and a small bunkhouse for the 4 hands he employed year-round. The original house had also been expanded, with 2 additional rooms and a proper kitchen. Nora had a vegetable garden that was the envy of the county, producing more than they could eat and allowing her to sell surplus in Helena. They had become pillars of the small community that was forming in the area. A town had sprung up about 10 miles from their ranch, a collection of buildings around a general store and a saloon. There was talk of building a church, and Nathan had donated both money and lumber to the effort. Nora had helped organize a school, and when Thomas turned 6, he began attending, riding in each day on a gentle mare his father had trained for him. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Nora into Helena for a rare night away from the ranch and the children, who were left in the capable hands of Mrs. Anders, the midwife who had become a close friend over the years. They had dinner at the best restaurant in town and walked the streets hand in hand like young sweethearts. 10 years, Nathan said, shaking his head in wonder. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Nora said. "Sometimes I still see that frightened girl pounding on your barn door in the storm. She seems like a different person now." "You have changed," Nathan agreed. "You are stronger now, more confident." "I had to be to keep up with you," Nora teased, but there was truth in it. The years of hard work and frontier life had transformed her from a sheltered, uncertain young woman into someone capable and strong. "I am proud of you," Nathan said seriously. "Proud of the mother you are, the partner you have been. I could not have built what we have without you." "We built it together," Nora corrected. "That is what partners do." They returned home late that night to find both children asleep and Mrs. Anders dozing in a chair by the fire. She woke when they came in, smiling at them. "They were perfect angels," she reported, which Nathan and Nora both knew was a generous exaggeration. "Did you have a lovely time?" "We did," Nora said. "Thank you for watching them." After Mrs. Anders left, Nathan and Nora checked on their sleeping children, standing together in the doorway of their room. Thomas was sprawled across his bed, one arm flung out, the picture of boyish abandon. Maggie slept curled up tight, her thumb in her mouth, a habit Nora kept trying to break her of. "We did all right," Nathan whispered, pulling Nora close. "We did better than all right," Nora whispered back. "We did wonderfully." More years passed, bringing both joy and challenges. When Thomas was 10 and Maggie was 7, Nora gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel after her father. The birth was difficult, and the doctor they had brought from Helena told Nora privately that she should not have any more children, that another pregnancy could be dangerous. Nora shared this news with Nathan, and he held her while she cried, grieving for the children she would not have. But he reminded her of the 3 beautiful children they had been blessed with, and eventually, Nora made peace with it. Daniel was a sweet-natured baby who rarely cried and seemed content with whatever was happening around him. Thomas and Maggie doted on their little brother, competing to help care for him. The ranch continued to thrive under Nathan's management, and he had become known throughout the territory as a fair employer and an honest dealer. When Thomas was 16, he announced his intention to take over the ranch someday, and Nathan felt a surge of pride so strong it almost brought him to tears. His son wanted the life he had built, wanted to continue the legacy. Maggie, on the other hand, had other plans. She was brilliant and restless, always reading and asking questions that neither parent could always answer. When she was 14, she announced that she wanted to go east for school, to become a teacher or perhaps even a doctor. Nathan's first instinct was to say no, to keep his daughter close where he could protect her. But Nora reminded him that they had always promised to let their children find their own paths, and so they agreed to send Maggie to a school in Chicago when she turned 16. The day they put Maggie on the train was one of the hardest of Nathan's life. She looked so young and small, though she carried herself with confidence. She hugged her parents fiercely, then her brothers, and climbed aboard without looking back. "She will be fine," Nora said, though tears were streaming down her face. "She is strong. We raised her to be strong." "I know," Nathan said, "but that does not make it any easier." They went home to a house that felt too quiet without Maggie's chatter and questions, but life went on. Thomas stepped up to take on more responsibility on the ranch, working alongside his father from dawn to dusk. Daniel, now a gangly 8-year-old, helped where he could and spent the rest of his time exploring the land with a curiosity that reminded Nathan of Maggie. Letters came regularly from Chicago, filled with Maggie's observations and experiences. She was thriving, she reported, though she missed home terribly. She had friends and was doing well in her classes. She thought she might want to be a teacher after all, to come back west and start a school in one of the growing towns. When Thomas was 19, he met a girl at a dance in Helena, the daughter of a shopkeeper. Her name was Lucy, and she had blonde curls and a laugh that could light up a room. Thomas fell hard and fast, and within 6 months, he asked Nathan's permission to marry her. Nathan looked at his son, now a man, and saw himself all those years ago, standing in his own house telling a wet, bedraggled woman that he loved her. "Does she make you happy?" Nathan asked. "Happier than I knew I could be," Thomas replied. "Then you have my blessing," Nathan said, and pulled his son into a hug. Thomas and Lucy were married the following spring, and Lucy moved to the ranch, fitting into the family as if she had always been there. She was cheerful and hardworking, and Nora loved her like the daughter she had always wished Maggie would have a friend in. A year later, Lucy gave birth to a son, making Nathan and Nora grandparents for the first time. They named the baby Nathan, after his grandfather, and Nathan Wright Sr. held his namesake with shaking hands and tears in his eyes. "Another generation," he said to Nora that night as they lay in bed. "Our grandson will grow up on this land, just like Thomas did." "Just like our great-grandchildren will, probably," Nora said. "We have built something that will last, Nathan, something real and good." Maggie came home for the first time in 3 years for her brother's wedding, and the change in her stunned her parents. She was a woman now, poised and educated, full of ideas and plans. She had finished her schooling and had accepted a position teaching at a school in Denver. She would not be coming back to Montana, she told them gently. Her life was elsewhere now. It hurt, but Nathan and Nora understood. They had always known Maggie was destined for things beyond the ranch. They were proud of her, even as they missed her. Daniel, meanwhile, was growing into a thoughtful young man with a gift for working with horses. He could gentle the most difficult animal, and Nathan often said Daniel had magic in his hands. When he was 16, Daniel announced his intention to start breeding horses, to build that side of the ranch business. Nathan gave him his full support and the resources to begin. The years continued their relentless march forward. Nathan's hair turned silver and lines deepened around his eyes, though he remained strong and active. Nora developed a touch of arthritis in her hands, but continued to work her garden and care for her growing family. Thomas and Lucy had 3 more children, and the ranch house rang with the sounds of grandchildren. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Thomas and Lucy and their children were there, of course, living as they did in a house built just 100 yards from the main house. Daniel, now married himself to a quiet girl from town, brought his wife and their baby daughter. Maggie made the long journey from Denver, bringing with her a gentleman friend she introduced as a fellow teacher, and Nora noticed the way they looked at each other and smiled knowingly. They gathered around a table laden with food, 3 generations of Wrights, and Nathan stood to make a toast. "30 years ago," he began, his voice still strong despite his age, "a storm brought the most precious gift of my life to my door. I found Nora Daniels stranded and desperate, and I offered her shelter from that storm. What I did not know then was that she would offer me shelter too. Shelter from loneliness, from aimlessness, from a life half-lived. She made me a better man. She gave me a family and a purpose. Everything good in my life stems from that one night when I heard pounding on the barn door and opened it to find her there." He turned to Nora, taking her hand. "You are still my shelter," he said softly. "My safety. My home. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." There was not a dry eye around the table as Nora stood and kissed her husband, and the family erupted in cheers and applause. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Nathan and Nora walked out to the porch as they had done countless times over the decades. The Montana sky was ablaze with stars, and the air smelled of grass and horses and home. "We have had a good life," Nora said, leaning against Nathan's shoulder. "The best," Nathan agreed. "I would not change a single moment." "Not even the storm that nearly killed me?" Nora asked with a smile. "Especially not that," Nathan said. "That storm was fate bringing you to me. Everything else was just us, building something beautiful together." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. The house they had expanded and improved, the barn and outbuildings, the pastures where their cattle and horses grazed, the garden Nora still tended, the graves of the dogs they had loved over the years, marked with simple stones. The whole rich tapestry of a life lived fully and well. More years passed, and Nathan and Nora grew old together with grace and gratitude. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, with grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren running through the ranch. They saw Montana gain statehood in 1889 and watched as the wild frontier they had known slowly became more civilized, though the land itself remained wild and beautiful. When Nathan was 72 and Nora was 69, Nathan's health began to fail. His strong body, which had carried him through decades of hard labor, started to betray him. He developed a cough that would not go away, and the doctor from Helena diagnosed him with a consumption of the lungs. Nathan accepted the diagnosis with calm resignation, but Nora raged against it, refusing to believe that the man who had been her rock for more than 4 decades could be taken from her. "We have more time," she insisted, as if her will alone could make it so. "We have had more time than most people ever get," Nathan replied gently. "We have had a lifetime together, Nora. A full, rich, beautiful lifetime." That final summer, Nathan sat on the porch most days, watching the land he loved, surrounded by family. Thomas ran the ranch now, doing an excellent job of it. Daniel's horse breeding operation had become renowned throughout the territory. Maggie visited when she could, bringing her husband and their children. The great-grandchildren climbed on Nathan's lap and listened to his stories of the old days, when the frontier was truly wild. On a warm September evening, with Nora holding his hand and the sun setting golden over the mountains, Nathan Wright drew his last breath. His final words were, "I love you," directed at his wife, and she whispered the same words back through her tears. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a large oak tree he had always loved. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Nathan had touched over the years. Cowboys he had employed, neighbors he had helped, friends he had made. Everyone spoke of his integrity, his kindness, his strength. Nora stood at the grave after everyone else had left, her children surrounding her, and she felt the weight of loss settle over her like a heavy blanket. But beneath the grief was something else. Gratitude, for every moment they had shared, for the family they had built, for the love that had sustained them through everything. "The shelter he offered became a lifetime of safety," she whispered, repeating words Thomas had spoken during the eulogy. "And I offered him the same. We sheltered each other." Nora lived for another 8 years after Nathan's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, telling anyone who asked that she had already had the great love of her life and did not need another. She continued to work in her garden until the very end, finding peace in the simple act of coaxing life from the Montana soil. When she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77, they buried her next to Nathan beneath that oak tree. The entire family gathered once more, now numbering in the dozens. Thomas, now an old man himself, spoke at her funeral. "My parents' love story began with a storm," he said. "My mother was lost and desperate, and my father offered her shelter. But what grew from that simple act of kindness was a love that sustained them through 45 years of marriage and changed all of our lives. They built this ranch together. They built this family together. Everything we are, everything we have, comes from them and the love they shared." He paused, looking out at the faces before him, seeing his own children and grandchildren, seeing his siblings' descendants, seeing the future stretching out before them all. "They taught us that love is not just a feeling," he continued. "It is a choice you make every day. It is showing up for each other, working together, building something that lasts. They taught us that family is the most important thing, that the land will sustain you if you respect it, that kindness matters, that integrity matters, that a life well lived is the greatest legacy you can leave." As the sun set over the ranch that evening, the family lingered at the gravesite, telling stories and sharing memories. Children played among the headstones, their laughter carrying on the wind, life continuing as it always does. Years later, when Thomas was an old man and his own grandson asked him about his parents, he would tell the story of the storm. How his mother had been stranded and desperate. How his father had heard her pounding on the barn door and opened it, offering shelter to a stranger. How that simple act had led to a lifetime of love. "They were meant for each other," Thomas would say. "And we are all here because on one stormy night my father chose to be kind. He chose to help someone in need, and that choice changed everything." The ranch continued to thrive through the generations, each one building on what Nathan and Nora had started. The house was eventually replaced with a larger, more modern structure, but the barn Nathan had built still stood, carefully maintained by his descendants. And on the hill beneath the oak tree, 2 headstones marked the graves of the couple who had started it all. Nathan Wright, the stone read, 1852 to 1924, loving husband, father, and friend. He opened his door to a stranger and found his home. Nora Wright, read the other, 1855 to 1932. Beloved wife, mother, and matriarch. She found shelter in a storm and built a lifetime of love. The land around them stretched out in all directions, rich and green in summer, golden in autumn, white in winter, renewed each spring. The cattle still grazed in the pastures. Horses still ran in the paddocks. The creek still flowed through the eastern section. And in the garden that had been Nora's pride, her great-great-granddaughter planted vegetables each year, continuing a tradition that stretched back more than 70 years. The storm that had brought Nora to Nathan's door was long forgotten by everyone except the family, kept alive through stories passed down through generations. But the love that had grown from that desperate night continued to ripple outward, shaping lives that had not yet been lived, creating futures that had not yet been imagined. On quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass and the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, you could almost feel their presence there. Nathan and Nora, together as they had always been, watching over the land and the family they had built with their own hands and hearts. Their love had indeed become a shelter, not just for themselves but for all who came after. It was a foundation strong enough to weather any storm, a legacy of commitment and partnership, and the choice to build something meaningful together. And it endured, as true love always does, beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything that could diminish it. The shelter Nathan offered that stormy night had become a lifetime of safety for Nora. And the love she gave in return had become his salvation, his purpose, his everything. Together, they had created something that would last forever, etched not just in the land they had worked or the family they had raised, but in the very air of the place, in the memory of all who came after, in the story that would be told and retold as long as there were Wrights on that Montana ranch. And so their story ended not with death, but with continuation. Not with loss, but with legacy. Not with an ending at all, really, but with the promise that what they had built together would endure, generation after generation. A testament to the power of love born in the midst of a storm and nurtured into something eternal.